great panel here tonight with us. Keith Knight is an award-winning cartoonist, does Chronicles, Think, The Nightlife, and Sharon Kyle is the editor and publisher of LA Progressive magazine. She's also a law professor at People's College of Law, also a board member of the ACLU in Pasadena, so you're very busy. Thank you for taking the time out to join us. Frank Conniff is not as busy. He's just a comedian.
Exactly.
Of course, he's from Mystery Science Theater 3000, which a lot of you remember fondly. And he's also the writer of the Jimmy Dore Show. So thank you so much for all of you for coming out tonight to join us on The Point. So let's start with our first point. It's Rick Santorum. He was asked about welfare recipients in Iowa right before the voting in the Iowa caucus. And he had this disastrous point to make.
It just keeps expanding. I was in Indianola a few months ago, and I was talking to someone who works at the Department of Public Welfare here, and she told me that the state of Iowa is going to get fined if they don't sign up more people onto the Medicaid program. They're just pushing harder and harder to get more and more of you dependent upon them so they can get your vote. That's what the bottom line is. I don't want to make people's lives better by giving them somebody else's money. I want to give them the opportunity to go out and earn the money and provide for themselves and their families. And the best way to do that is to get the manufacturing sector of the economy rolling again.
Sharon, aren't you grateful that he wants to make your life better? You know, because you only have 8 jobs.
That's
and,
right.
you know, if you would just stop taking the welfare. I mean, look at that assumption, right?
Yeah. It's really disturbing to see something like that, especially coming from the national level. Here we have a person who's running for the highest seat in the land. And supposedly, because he wants to represent the entire American population, which, if no one's noticed, includes a bunch of black people. I watched that several times when it was aired, and one of the things that I found most disturbing is that most of the political punditry focused on whether or not he made a political mistake in making that statement. No one really has delved into the underlying message. Why is it that someone running for a national level office can use or can leverage off the fears of white people in this post-racial society and get away with it, and actually choose to do that because he thinks it's going to put him in a better position?
You know, now, one show that did cover the substance behind it is the Young Turks, I'm proud to say. And one of the things we pointed out was that in people getting food stamps in Iowa turned out to be 84% white. Okay, 9% black.
84% of white of everything is in Iowa, right?
Right, that's true. But that's a good point. But look, if you look at Iowa again for Medicaid recipients, 74% white, 13% Hispanic, 8% black. So, you know, Keith, I think it goes to the assumptions that's in this guy's head. And, you know, there's was a debate as to whether he did it on purpose to get, you know, racist votes in Iowa, or if he just kind of said it. I actually think that he actually thinks it, and that he said it because he thinks it, that it wasn't planned out.
Yeah, it seems pretty sincere to me, and it's. I don't think it's such a big surprise. I don't think it's a surprise to black people that he would say something like that. What we're seeing with this election, with a bunch of the Republican-run states putting in all these voter hoops and things to jump through, we're seeing regression as far as trying to subdue voters, and we're seeing just things going backwards. We're seeing the education system going backwards. We're seeing a lot of stuff going backwards. So it seems like old times to me, race baiting.
Yeah, where do you come out on that, Frank? Do you think he was race baiting? Either?
Well, yeah, I've kind of come down on the side of what a lot of people have been saying about Rick Santorum is that, you know, unlike Mitt Romney, who is just pandering, Rick Santorum sincerely believes his crazy beliefs. You know, they're deeply held, and I actually heard some coverage last night of people were praising him for that, and I think it doesn't matter if you have a guy who sincerely believes that or who's just pandering, you're still going to get the same bad result. And you described it as a disastrous point that he made. And by disastrous point, do you mean the point that propelled him to victory in the caucus? Because it's...
Even if it wasn't intended, you're right, Frank, it wound up not hurting him at all.
No.
I mean, we don't know if it helped him, but it certainly didn't hurt.
That's the overall, you know, it's like you said, there's nothing new about this, and I think it's been the overall point of view of conservatives that, you know, white people have to be afraid of, black people are taking away, you know, the conservative point of view is back in the 50s, everything was so great. Why can't we go back to that wonderful time? In other words, that wonderful time when black people and a lot of minorities had no rights whatsoever. White people got everything back then. And I think not just Santorum, but the entire Republican Party is trying to appeal to that in certain white voters.
And, you know, it's not just the political leaders, it's the commentators as well. When you hear Rush Limbaugh over and over again with, oh, his welfare state, Obama's welfare state, and, you know, he
said that Obama, everything Obama is doing is about reparations to black people, which was one of the most crazily racist things I've heard.
I mean, I wish Obama was actually looking out for black folks more, right? I mean, right? I mean, we have disastrous, you know, foreclosure situation for all Americans. When you look at some of the numbers that how the minority community is getting affected, and Professor Cornel West talks about this all the time. I mean, let me ask you, Professor Kyle, I mean, do you get a sense that President Obama has been, you know, better to the minority community, like, or has gone out of his way to help the minority community? I honestly don't get that sense.
No, I don't get that sense at all. However, I have to say that the president understands the climate, the racial climate that exists today in America. Here we are in 2012, but if you look at the numbers, if you look from an educational standpoint, we have more segregated schools in the country today than we did in 1954 when Brown v. Board of Education was decided upon. We have more segregation in our churches. We have more segregation in our communities. When you think of communities where people live, where people working, the president understands the climate, the racial climate, and he has to walk very gently around these issues, particularly because he is a black man and the first black president.
Yeah, I wish he wouldn't walk so gently. I mean, today he does some recess appointments, which is a strong way to go. And what happened? Everybody gave him all the credit in the world. They're like, oh, strong leadership. So why doesn't he do that more often, I think? I mean, look, to your point on segregation, Koch brothers are actually funding groups to go and resegregate the schools in North Carolina. That's to your point, we're going backwards here. I can't believe how backwards we're going. But, you know, let me bring up a controversial guy, Ron Paul, who's also in the Republican race, with the newsletters, et cetera. But he makes an interesting point where he says, look, I think the number one problem, or the number one way that we could help minority communities is by getting this senseless drug war. It relates to another topic that we had on the point on an earlier week when Richard Branson tweeted out saying this amazing fact that there are now more black men in jail today than there were slaves in the beginning of the Civil War.
That's right.
Which is amazing.
That statistic came from an exhaustive research project that was conducted by Michelle Alexander and published in her recent book, The New Jim Crow, where she talks about where black men stand today and makes a comparison, does an analysis, a comparison between the Jim Crow South and black men today, and how formerly incarcerated and felons now are treated in the same manner that black men were treated back in the 1920s and 30s.
And, you know, we talked about that on the Young Turks, and Keith, I want to throw this to you. I mean, some think, well, this is another way to, you know, go back to the situation that we were in. You lock up people for nonsense, and you do it disproportionately. You know, white people, whether they're buying cocaine, selling cocaine, et cetera, get arrested at a much, much lower rate as a percentage, et cetera. And then now they have private prisons where they profit off of it. And then they're making the prisoners do basically slave labor. I mean, that is white, black, Hispanic, doesn't matter, right?
Exactly.
So, I mean, do you think all this stuff is on purpose?
Of course. It's a huge industry, and it's cheap labor, and it's a way to keep what was going on a long time ago, just in a way that convinces people that, oh, well, you know, they shouldn't have broke the law or they shouldn't have done this, you know, so they shouldn't have any rights in prison. That's the thing that drives me crazy. When I do slideshows at youth prisons and stuff, I see kids that are in there for something that everybody I knew in college did several times over. They just didn't get caught because they weren't, you know, that they didn't have the cops all keeping an eye out, just waiting for them to screw up in any way, shape, or form.
Right. It seems like the best way to stay out of jail, that maybe all kids should learn, is to become a Wall Street banker and plunder our nation's wealth and bring our economy to the brink. That will keep you out of jail.
But Frank, that's a great point, and I want you to address that as our last point here, because this stuff, demagoguing against other races, and honestly against class too, like the poor, etc.,
right,
works so much better. Or maybe it's because that's the only thing they're trying. Whereas, shouldn't Americans be so much more mad about the $7 trillion that the bankers took off the Fed, right, the $700 billion that they took off of TARP? You're worried about welfare? Somebody getting money from welfare? They took over $7 trillion, the bankers.
Yeah, well, but the whole attitude is, if you're poor, it's your own fault. You know, there's nothing. If you're arrested, if you're sent to jail, and you're not a Wall Street banker, then you only have yourself to blame.
Yeah, it's easy to kind of direct your anger towards an individual than a corporation.
And I think that the story is shaped and molded by the corporation. So we have the media that is basically controlled by corporations, and they are the ones that frame the story, that help the masses to have this deep-seated fear of blacks or to believe in these welfare queens. So it's propagated by those who benefit from the masses believing it.
There were several stories on Fox News, which I'm sure you're aware of, about how do poor people really have it that bad? You know, a lot of them have microwaves, some of them have television sets, some of them are really extravagant, they have refrigerators. I mean, these are, you know, it sounds like I'm joking, but they actually did, Bill O'Reilly and John Stossel actually did a whole segment about that, and it's you can't make that stuff up.
And Rush Limbaugh once said, "Well, if these kids that need these assisted lunches and free lunches, they're hungry, why don't they just go to the fridge?" Like, he literally said that, right? And my last point on this is, if you want to get angry at welfare queens, the person you should be angry at is Michelle Bachmann. Michelle Bachmann. Her family took over $250,000 for their farm. And then she turns around and says, oh, can you believe people are living off the government? Why don't you give us $250,000 back, and then we'll talk about who the welfare queen is, okay? All right, now when we come back, we're going to have a point from Mark Steinberg. Should we be more civil to our right-wing brothers and sisters? I'm not sure we should, so we'll discuss it on the point. All right, we're back on the point. Now we're going to have a point by former Clinton administration attorney Mark Steinberg about reaching out to the other side, to our right-wing friends.
I'm Mark Steinberg, a retired attorney and a former official in the state and justice departments during the Clinton administration. I'm also a blogger on the Huffington Post. My point today is less a point than a question, and it's who is stupider, the people who fly over or the people who are flown over? The other night at a dinner party given by an old lefty friend of mine, I listened as a group of people who could recite from memory every Democrat they'd ever voted for express their shock, chagrin, and chest pain over how the couple 100 million people who were not them could be so terribly, terribly wrong. They sneered at the fact that adults who were permitted to vote could possibly believe that global warming is caused by people forgetting to close their ovens. They doubled over laughing at the notion that what gay people really need to get their heads on straight is quality time with pole dancers. And they literally tossed their cookies, I remind you that this was a dinner party, over the proposition that Barack Obama isn't a real citizen because Hawaii isn't a real state. The underlying assumption seemed to be that if these ignoramuses who embrace these ideas would spend a week in Santa Monica or New Haven, the country would get back on track. To a great extent, I share these views. I watch what passes for discourse on Fox News and am absolutely astonished by the number of knees that seem to jerk when words like socialist or phrases like tax and spend are thrown into the maw. These people on both sides of the camera are not really thinking, I think. But what I and my like-minded friends tend to ignore is that we really do have to get through to these folks, and that we're stupid, really, really stupid, if we think that railing at them or about them is going to accomplish that. The battle we've joined shouldn't be about who's the louder shouter. It should be about who's the better listener. And that's my point. You can find more of this kind of pontification at HuffingtonPost.com, Mark-Steinberg.
You know, I'm really split on Mark's point there. I'm 50-50 on it because, of course, I want people to talk together. And I think that if you got the guys on the right-wing side who are frustrated with their government and guys on the left-wing side who are also frustrated with their government to talk to one another, that you would get a lot of agreement. But I think he's wrong that you cannot accomplish things by shouting loudly. Now, I'm biased because I'm a loud shouter, okay? But think about it. Rush Limbaugh's of the world and Fox News Channel have been shouting for all this time. And what happened? They drowned everybody else out. Right. They wound up convincing independents that didn't know that much about the facts. And their side is winning. So is Mark right or wrong? Frank, let's start with you.
Well, I agree that we need more civil discourse. I think, you know, with Obama, Obama's whole thing is civility and reaching out to other people and trying to make the other side of the aisle see your point of view. Obama is all about that, and that's been a frustration, I think, for a lot of people, that he's trying to reach out to people on the other side of the aisle who don't want to hear what he's saying and who are only going to make things worse by the fact that he is reaching out to them. So at this particular point in history, I don't know if, I think we need more people standing up for what they believe in and being willing to shout about it if necessary.
Keith, shout or no shout?
Well, I think it's a combination of the two. I just remember when Barney Frank tore like a new a-hole of like somebody who, I can't remember what she was talking about. Yeah, during the healthcare. Yeah. And I'm from Massachusetts, so I can say this. He went masshole on this person at this event, and it really, I thought, like right then it was going to be a rise of massholes who would just tell it like it is, like, I don't know what planet. I think he was like, I don't know what planet you're on or whatever. You know, it was just like, and I was like, thank goodness someone's saying that. And there need to be more folks who do that. But I can't possibly imagine Obama will start doing that. But I do think that he is gonna, once this election goes by and he's not worried about getting reelected anymore, he's gonna drop the hammer and just be like,
no way. I totally disagree with that. It is not in his nature. He doesn't have a hammer.
But not in the way that we want to see him do it. He's going to be Mr. Cool the whole time, but he's got nothing to lose at that point. And
Keith, I got to tell you, man, I've been following politics my whole life, and everybody always talks about the second term. Oh, in the second term, then they'll really do what's it. The only guy who in the second term kept doing what he was doing, and even more so, was Bush. Because he was like, oh, great, you guys made the mistake of giving me a second term. You know, well, I'm shocked he didn't attack Iran while he was there. That dude had a hammer.
All right. Yeah, but all right. So that was the last president. So maybe it's a new thing now. Maybe
he's copied so many other things Bush has done. Maybe it's possible.
Exactly. I just want to say this, that it is about a combination. Before the Occupy protests, there was the WTO up in Seattle, like years back.
That's right, when the turtle outfits and everything, yeah.
And it was a huge protest, but it was the people that broke a few windows that really kind of shut that thing down. And there always needs to be a few people who break a few windows.
Now, I have to denounce and reject that officially. Having said that, Professor Kyle, I read a really interesting look back at the history of the Civil Rights Movement. And so Martin Luther King is doing the, obviously peaceful protests, et cetera. It's having a huge effect. But at the same time, Lyndon Johnson and some of the Democrats start to get scared because there's rioting in the streets, right? And so people like Malcolm X start pushing in a direction that made people really uncomfortable. Then they went, okay, I'll take MLK, right? We'll do the Civil Rights Act, and everybody just... So does Keith have an interesting point?
Yes, I think he does. I think that it is important to have both. But what we need is balance. So right now, if you take a look at AM radio or Fox, there is no balance. What we have is this shouting, and what you need is maybe some of that. But on the other side, when you have civil discourse, it requires that you have an educated populace. And that's the problem. We don't have an educated populace. Increasingly, less and less, or fewer and fewer of our young people are learning civics in school, learning social studies. So these shouters on Fox and AM radio, they're very effective because they're not challenged.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Now, look, Frank, I'm on the side of, I don't believe unilateral disarmament. I'm actually not a liberal. I'm a progressive. I think there's a difference. But I remember when there was talk about unilateral disarmament with the Soviet Union, I was like, are you kidding me? No way, no way. Right? So now I disagreed with other things that Reagan did, et cetera, right? But so I think if they're shouting and we're saying, oh, let me listen. No, I got no interest in listening to their shouting. I'm coming over the top of you.
I think a lot of the mistake that I think progressive and liberal people have made over the years of the AM shouting is we've kind of reacted to them like Margaret Dumont, who was the character in the Marx Brothers movies, who was always outraged by what Groucho, oh, Mr. Captain Smalltig, just we would get very huffy about how outrageous Ann Coulter and Rush Limbaugh are, and I think it's more effective for us to come back with our more intelligent version, and it can be as high a decibel as we want, but a more intelligent rebuke to what they're saying, but to say it just as forcefully and just as much entertainment value too.
Yeah, that's what the Daily Show is. That's what the Daily Show is. Really, that's more. What's that statistic that more young people get their news from the Daily Show than the regular news channels? That's huge, and also it really comes down to media literacy, and it's something that's taught in different countries, but it's not taught here. Kids need to know, adults need to know, what the message is, what the message behind it is, who's funding certain things. If they're aware that, basically talk radio is just there to make people mad. That's it. That's it.
Media literacy of Fox News would be illiteracy, wouldn't it?
No, but to let people know, hey, what is it? Because when they see it on TV or they hear it on the radio, you get the sense that people think, well, that it must be true.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, just to let them know, it ain't necessarily so. It's just a windbag, whether it's me or whether it's Rush Limbaugh stating their opinions. But one last thing on this. Look, on the other hand, when you bring together Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street, they've done it in Richmond, they've done it in Memphis, people always come away like, oh my God, I can't believe how much we agree. Because, my point on this is, we've got big money that the left is concerned about, the big businesses, corporations, unlimited spending in our campaigns, et cetera. Then you got big government that the right wing is concerned about. The problem is when you bring them together, right? And you got big money buying big government, and it leads to big corruption, and we all hate that.
Right.
And so I feel like if we can get beyond those guys, shout back because you don't want to unilaterally disarm, but then get people in a room without that filter, without the media stuff, and have them talk. I think they're going to agree, so much more than they realize.
Yeah.
We're all agreed. That's the last point. So when we come back, Ellen Barkin tweets out about police brutality because she got shoved, and it relates, of course, to the Occupy Wall Street movement. So we'll talk about that when we return. We are back on the point with Keith Knight, Sharon Kyle, and Frank Conniff. Now we're going to talk about a tweet that Ellen Barkin sent. She's, of course, a famous actress, and she was worried about police brutality. It was a New Year's Day arrests were going on at Zuccotti Park, and she tweeted out, quote, "Just threatened on my street by NYPD. Cop shoved me, both hands, onto sidewalk. Is it a crime to stand in the street in New York? WTF is going on here?" If you don't know, you should ask somebody what that is. But okay, so now we found the video of her being shoved as well. I want to show you that for the context, and then we can talk about it.
mother fucking hands off of me. You don't need to say to people to talk to this caller. Why are you?
You know, I have mixed feelings about that, too. First of all, there's been a lot of police brutality against Occupy Wall Street. There's been, 5,837 documented arrests in 105 different cities. Whether did all those people deserve it, let alone how they got arrested, the pepper spray that we've seen over and over again, whether it's in Berkeley or New York, et cetera. On the other hand, you know, as I watch that video, I get a sense of privilege a little bit from Ellen Barkin. I mean, she's on our side. I want to say nice things, but can you imagine a cop pushes a young black guy a little bit? He says, "Get your motherfucking hands off me." Now, what do you think goes down next, Keith?
Well, I just want to say that, like, what happened to her for a celebrity, that was like being beaten by 10 cops, like for your average black man. So I am kind of on her side. What she says in here is, the NYPD cop shoved me both hands onto the sidewalk. And that video says that. And everyone assumed that she went down to the ground. But she literally was pushed onto a sidewalk. I'm not saying that, you know, I'm saying she could have been more clear about it. I think she was may have been purposely vague to enhance the drama of it. But it is a joke. I'm half joking about the whole celebrity thing. That's never going to happen, where a celebrity gets really manhandled by the police. You know,
right? But I mean, Frank, isn't that show you how crazy and perverse our society is? And in fact, a lot of people are just paying attention to this because she is a celebrity. I mean, forget black, white, it doesn't matter. A random guy at Occupy Wall Street, right, whatever his race or thing is, gets pushed, and he tweets out, "Oh my God, NYPD pushed me." People are like, "Yeah, so what?"
It's more relevant when a celebrity does it. And when Ellen Barkin says, "Get your motherfucking hands off me," it's hotter than when anybody else does it. Let's just say that. You know. So, and she's probably, you know, I feel for her because how badly she was treated by Daniel Stern in Diner when he yelled at her for replacing the alphabetical order of his record collection, you know. So she's, I don't always grasp reality that well, as you can tell. She's had a hard time.
So, Sharon, she also said afterwards, you know, it wasn't like, the cops weren't like this when I was growing up. And apparently she grew up in the Bronx, which I didn't know, right? but a lot of people said, hey, listen, when you were growing up, cops were a lot worse for some people in New York, right? And so it goes back to this point of privilege. So, I mean, how do you respond to that?
Well, in all fairness to her, we really can't expect her to understand or to know. I mean, she lives in a body that is treated with preference. She's a celebrity. She's young, she's attractive, she's thin, she's blonde. She's everything that American culture epitomizes as the best. So she's accustomed to being treated in a certain way. And in fact, I think that all Americans hold some privilege, varying degrees of privilege. I myself, as a woman, a black woman, but I myself as a woman am not treated the same as my son is treated by the police. I was once driving a car and I almost hit a pedestrian, and because I didn't see the pedestrian. And I was pulled over by the police, and as I was waiting for the officer to come and ask me for my license and registration, I could see him in my side mirror, and he had his hand on his gun. And he was unlatching, pulling his gun out. And I thought to myself, he thinks I'm a guy, because I had a big jacket on, I had a hat, and I was driving a truck. And as soon as I rolled down the window and I said to the officer, "I'm sorry, officer, I realized I did something wrong," his entire body language changed. He relaxed, he took his hand off the gun, he didn't even end up giving me a ticket, and I definitely deserved one. So,
well, it has a happy ending, so that doesn't usually happen with us guys.
Another point is I was surrounded by a bunch of cops in San Francisco. Well, this one cop was super gung-ho, and I was waiting at the bus stop. And he pulled up, cross traffic, shined his lights on me, gets out of the car, asked me to put my hands up, and he calls, and all these other cops show up, and apparently there was someone, a black man, who was supposedly robbing houses, and I said, "What's the description?" They said, "A 6-foot-tall black man," and I said, "Anything else?" And they're like, "No," and so it's like, well, every black man's 6 foot tall, you know. It just, but the point was, I was down there, and literally 4 cop cars surrounded me, and the bus that I usually take, I come back home from, was coming down the street. And my roommate was on it, my white roommate was on it, and he was coming down the street, and he said, after talking to him, he was sitting there going, there's got to be, they must be hassling a black man down there, you know, just seeing all these cops. And as he got closer, he was like, oh my God, that's my black man. Like and the bus rolls up, and he gets off the bus, and he comes running across traffic, against the light, and starts swearing and screaming at all these cops. And if he was a black man doing that, they would have been on him so quickly and beat the hell out of him. And instead, they were like, oh, no, you know, we've made a mistake. I think we've made a, you know, like literally, I was shocked. I was like, oh my God. Like, I was telling him, like, Dagan, take it easy, man. Take it easy, right. You know? Like, it was white privilege defined right there.
You know, that goes to a really interesting point. That the people who have that privilege so often have no idea that they have it. Right. So, for example, right, there's many examples of this. One is in the case of police brutality. You know, another story that we covered on the Young Turks once. The son of a famous pitcher is in a Texas town. He's driving into his own driveway. Cops pull him over. He gets out of the house because he's going to go home. They shoot him, right? And they're like, well, how did we know he was here, right? Like, whereas a white person does not get shot in his driveway, so he has no idea that you can get shot in your driveway as a black guy for being, you know, in the wrong part of town, meaning the best part of town, right? And then it extends to other things as well. So Vice President Gore and I were talking about this during the Iowa caucus coverage on Current, right? About education. So, for example, to your point, Sharon, we're all privileged, right? My dad was an olive farmer in the middle of southeastern Turkey. He had to bust his ass to get to a point where he can get a free education if he scored really, really high. I had the privilege of being able to take, you know, practice tests for the SATs, et cetera. But as a kid, I didn't realize that. And I thought, well, if I do this well, and the other kid doesn't do that well, then I should get the things, let alone people like Romney, whose dad was a governor, and, you know, there's heritage in these schools, so that if your dad went, you get a much easier time. Is that one of the top problems here, that the problem is that white people don't know, and I'm just using that generally, it's true for a lot of us too in a lot of different circumstances, they don't know what other folks are going through, so it's hard for them to empathize. That's
right, that's right. I mean, you talked about the heritage in schools. It's affirmative action. That's what that is, but it's not called that.
Right. No. Like George W. Bush going to Yale, right, and to Harvard Business School, and not the brightest guy in the world. I'll just step on a limb and say that.
Yeah, you know, the great line from Governor Ann Richards on that. You know, George Bush was born on third and thought he hit a triple, and that perfectly describes exactly what we're talking about. And then as they're standing on third base, they're going, "What? Why didn't you hit a triple?"
Yeah,
you know. Yeah. And so, you know, and I don't want, my last point on this, I don't want anybody to get me wrong, right? I love that Ellen Barkin cares about this issue. I like that she brought it forward. I'm on her side. You know, I just wanted to have a general conversation about the idea of privilege, and so that everybody can begin to empathize with what we're describing.
Also, whenever there's a protest movement, it seems like there's always police brutality always comes. So you have to be kind of aware of that happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, and the police are part of the 99%. And I wish sometimes that they would act that way. But of course, in New York, for example, Raymond Kelly gets fancy parties thrown for him by J.P. Morgan and some of the other big funders of his police association. So he sends the orders, make sure you look out for my boys at J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs. And unfortunately, that's how the world goes around. Yeah. All right. Now, I want to make one final point this week. And that is about the murderer's row of clowns and despot wannabes on the Republican side. We just had the Iowa caucus, and as you look through all the different people on that side, you think, oh my God, one is worse than the other. You've got Santorum, who says, you know, that he doesn't believe in birth control. We're going back that far? Let alone his views on race, which we discussed today, let alone his views on gay folks, let alone the fact that he was the head of the K Street Project and was organizing with the lobbyists in Washington and is some of the, and helped to promote that culture of corruption in D.C. Then you go to Mitt Romney. You want to talk about a culture of corruption. He's already taken $8 million from the banks. There is no better representative of Wall Street than Mitt Romney. When they ask him if you'll bail him out again, he says, well, we'll have to see. Okay, so that more money is going to the bankers if Mitt Romney gets elected. Then you go to Newt Gingrich, and Newt Gingrich is probably worse than all of them, saying, I don't really care that much about what the Constitution says. I will, if the courts are ruling in ways that I don't like, I'll subpoena them, I'll drag them in front of me, I'll fire them, I'll get rid of whole circuit courts, which is insanity, right? And I mean, his nickname, in my opinion, is Danger to the Republic. Okay, that's Newt Gingrich, and everybody's asking why. Why can't they find a decent candidate? This is a really simple answer to that. They don't want one. If they wanted a decent candidate, they could get one. One would enter, and then he would do well. In fact, John Huntsman is by far the most moderate and reasonable of these guys. In Utah, not only was he really successful and really popular, he was #1 in the country in creating jobs. Now, I don't agree with a lot of what John Huntsman has to say, but he represents a bearable alternative, one who's not crazy. So how have the Republican voters treated him? With utter disdain. They have dismissed him out of hand. John Huntsman, he got 1% in the Iowa caucuses. The reason you have those crazy guys on the Republican side running for president is because that's what the Republican voters asked for. All right, now I want to thank everybody who participated here. Keith Knight is an award-winning cartoonist. Everybody check out Chronicles, Think, and The Nightlife. Professor Sharon Kyle is editor and publisher of LA Progressive Magazine, and she's also professor of law, of course, at People's College of Law. And Frank Conniff is from Mystery Science Theater 3000, which everybody remembers.
Cinematic Titanic, currently.
Oh, exactly. Tell us a little bit about that.
You can go to cinematictitanic.com. We do live version of Mystery Science Theater. We're touring all over the country. You can find out information at cinematictitanic.com.
But you better hurry because I hear you're sold out everywhere.
Well, we were last time, but...
All right. And I want to thank the people who sent in points. Mark Steinberg, of course. And then we took... Rick Santorum did not send in his point. But it was a topic we wanted to discuss today. And then Ellen Barkin's tweet as well. And I want to thank all of you for watching The Point. We'll see you next time.